Welcome back. We finally left the confines of Midgar behind and are on our way through the wide open world. We have 3 very different tracks to cover this time, so let's get right into it. The first town we come across is mainly striking in its utter difference from the metropolis we just left behind. It's called Calm, and even though there are still signs of technology in this little village, it's a welcome change. A dozen timbered houses arranged around a welcoming town square, complete with a nice 2-story inn. It's almost like being back in a classic Final Fantasy game, and fittingly, we get a classic Final Fantasy tune. It's a very simple song, a nice clean melody, relatively simple chords, and a very basic structure. I've mentioned song structure before, and here it fits perfectly. Just look at this. And then compare that to this track's structure. So basically, it's just a verse-verse-chorus structure, like a regular song, which is exactly what this is. And that's pretty fitting. After the complex web of Midgar with all its intricacies and all those sectors, this new situation is very simple. We're at an inn in a small town, resting up and planning ahead. Even so, this track has too much of a cozy, ideal world kind of feel even for me. To be fair, the village is called Calm, so we can't really expect a bustling hub of rigorous activity, and the place is of course meant as a direct opposite to grungy, technological, wild Midgar, but still, I don't really like the song, especially the instruments. As is sometimes the case with me, as you've seen throughout the series so far, I much prefer a different version of this track. The piano collection contains a very nice and simple rendition of this piece. I think in that version we can hear the intent of this track much more clearly. It's quite simply the start of a new chapter. We are now travelers instead of fugitives. And this song reflects that. After so many hours of rundown cyberpunk and planet-polluting mega machines, we are now in a place where the world is still somewhat okay and somewhat clean and a little more trusting. Welcome to the shortest song on the whole album. As you know, I usually let the track play in the background while I talk about it, but I think if I do that here, you might shut off the video in about 30 seconds, so I won't do that. So let's just listen to the prelude theme. We never get to hear that anyway. Just like every Final Fantasy game has battle music, running out of time music, chocobo music, or airship music, most of them also have going to sleep music, or inn music, or goodnight music, whatever you want to call it. It's music for when your party goes to sleep at an inn. It usually sounds like a lullaby. Well, actually it doesn't, really. I looked up the typical signs of lullabies, cause, you know, that's the kind of place where this series takes me, and there really aren't a lot of similarities between lullabies and this track, except that it's very soothing, which is mainly due to the instruments. A harp, a flute, and a very smooth bass. For obvious reasons, this is one of the few non-repetitious tracks on the album, which makes sense since it represents falling asleep and ending the day. It's only 4 bars long, the melody moves steadily downward, and all of the instruments more or less trail off in the end, instead of ending on a bang or something. This also gives us that sense of smoothly falling asleep. The arpeggios, meaning the chords which are broken up into notes and played in smooth succession instead of all at once, represented by this symbol, also make the song sound a lot more gentle. I know I'm not really telling you anything new here, but, you know, it's a 9-second song, there's only so much I can do. Maybe it's because I played VII before all the other Final Fantasy games. In fact, this is probably the reason, but this version of the inn song was always the quintessential one for me. All the others sound kind of derivative to me when I hear them. Remember in the last episode when I said I think the main theme is almost Cloud's theme but not quite? Well, I've been thinking. I was gonna say that this is the closest thing to a theme for Cloud. In fact, I was almost convinced, and I will explain why I thought that. But I also realized there are probably many viable theories concerning what constitutes Cloud's theme. I might actually make a separate video about that at one point. Still, to me, this might still be the frontrunner. Why is that? Well, let's look at the narrative context first. When the party arrives at the inn in Calm, the others urge Cloud to talk about his past in Soldier and his relationship with Sephiroth. We don't get our new track immediately at this point. While Cloud recounts his experiences, it's mostly Anxious Heart, which makes sense since it's the Nibelheim theme and most of this long flashback scene takes place there. So, the story in a nutshell. Cloud and Sephiroth arrive at Nibelheim to inspect the local Mako reactor. Sephiroth discovers something alarming about his own nature, then he shuts himself off in the Shinra mansion. It's only when we come to this second part of the flashback that we finally get the track. Cloud goes to confront Sephiroth, who brushes off any attempts of Cloud to talk. He starts burying himself in research, trying to get closer to the mystery of himself. And, well, that's it. That's the part where we hear the track On That Day 5 years ago. Why is this narrative context important to Cloud? Well, much later in the story, he discovers something about himself that completely upends his worldview. He, and we along with him, discover some truths about him. These revelations are at the heart of Cloud's character, and at the heart of Final Fantasy VII's plot. So, the whole story hangs on this day, 5 years ago, on this weirdly unreliable flashback of Cloud's, and also on the way it's finally resolved many hours later. The song can also be heard just before the final dungeon, the North Crater, when Tifa and Cloud share a quiet moment of introspection together. So, all this is why I thought, if Cloud has a theme, this might be it, but as I've said, I'm not so sure anymore. Wow, that might have been the most I've talked about a track without mentioning the music once. The first thing we notice, the mood is very melancholy, especially compared to its closest musical relative, the main theme of Final Fantasy VII. In musical terms, there are a few reasons for this. First and foremost, it's the fact that this is in a minor key instead of a major one. Then there's the way the melody kind of tapers off instead of reaching a satisfying conclusion like the main theme. Also, the melody keeps repeating with only slight variations. This happens 4 times in all, and then of course the whole thing starts over again, which at least to me makes it sound as if we are always trying to come close to a conclusion, but instead are starting over with only a little bit of difference each time. Now, I know that I tend to read a lot into these tracks, but that really is a perfect metaphor for Cloud's damaged memory and his attempts to fill in the blanks in different ways. With all that said, there are 2 more small moments that I love about this track. I'm the kind of person, and I'm sure some of you are as well, who gets obsessed with these little moments in music, even with songs that I don't actually like. Well, I do like this track a lot, but these 2 moments still stand out to me. First, there is the shift to a major chord at the end of some of the phrases. This gives the whole thing a hopeful note and also adds some structure to the track. And I also love this little dissonance, which clears up as the melody moves forward. What I really like about On That Day 5 years ago is how perfectly it fits in this little narrative corner for which it was composed. It's the perfect story within a story track. It's moody and pensive, it's sorrowful, but it also conveys a clear sense of hope. And that was it for part 10. Thank you for watching and I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for part 11.